It is, to me, deplorable that we're considered disposable.
A dimming dream of retirement in California. The factors that left seniors scrambling to stay afloat. In California, fires back at the president's zero-tolerance policy. The new demand aimed at reuniting migrant kids with their parents.
We're making the difficult phone calls. We're having the difficult conversations. We are holding people accountable who are not giving fathers the best services they deserve.
Meet an advocate for fathers, how one man's personal journey helps connect them to their kids. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. Questions remain about the fate of migrant families and their children. House Republican leaders postponed a vote today on immigration reform. The Pentagon says it will help house as many as 20,000 children who cross the border by themselves.
The Department of Defense has been asked whether it can house 20,000 unaccompanied children between now and the end of the year. How will that work? Is it even feasible? And how is the administration keeping track of the families who have already been separated, and what are their plans and timetable for reuniting them?
The Pentagon has identified 4 bases as potential shelter locations for the children, including Little Rock Air Force Base in Arkansas and 3 bases in Texas. Today, First Lady Melania Trump got a look at how 2 shelters take care of children who were taken away from their parents. Workers told her the children were often distraught when they first arrive. California's Attorney General plans on fighting the president's zero-tolerance policy. He's joining a coalition of attorneys generals. They say the practice of separating kids from their parents was cruel and illegal. They're demanding a system to reunite the families. PBS NewsHour will have more analysis on the immigration and debated in the forced family separations tonight at 7 right here on KPBS. In a unanimous vote, the State Utilities Commission has rejected a plan for a major gas pipeline through San Diego. The pipeline would have traveled 47 miles from Miramar to Rainbow. SDG&E had a major stake in the plan to replace a smaller pipeline. Members of the commission said the $639 million project is unnecessary and that the demand for natural gas is decreasing. A scathing audit of the San Ysidro School District exposed potential financial fraud. Now it's been turned over to the district attorney. iNews Source reporter Leonardo Castaneda tells us what happens next.
The state audit released last week found 2 of the district's top former administrators probably misused district funds. Among the allegations against former Superintendent Julio Fonseca and his deputy, Jose Arturo Sanchez Macias, they were overpaid more than $300,000 for life insurance and vacation days. Auditors also found the pair used petty cash and other funds to get around the district's financial controls. The district attorney's office rarely confirms an investigation, but a spokesman said in a statement to iNews Source that the district attorney's office encourages and welcomes any information about suspected public corruption. The statement also said the DA is committed to holding individuals accountable who would misuse public funds intended to support the education of children in San Diego County. A lawyer for Fonseca said the audit's findings were wrong and his client will be exonerated. His former deputy has also disputed the audit. For KPBS, I'm iNews Source reporter Leonardo Castaneda.
iNews Source is an independently funded nonprofit media partner of KPBS. San Diego customers are still waiting for answers on those excessive water bills. A city audit may explain why some customers were overcharged hundreds of dollars. KPBS reporter Claire Tregesser explains why it's been delayed.
The audit was originally supposed to be released at the beginning of June, but City Auditor Eduardo Luna now says it won't come until July. The reason, he says, is that it took longer than expected to get billing data. In an email to KPBS, he said they requested the data in February, shortly after the billing problems were found. but they didn't get the numbers until the end of April. He added that the delay isn't because of a lack of cooperation from Public Utilities Department staff. The data was hard to find in the city system. Local media have covered many stories of really big water bills, including a Normal Heights resident who was told he owed $3,800. Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
San Diego County water managers celebrated the beginning of summer by recognizing the importance of water in building the region's economy. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson has details.
A San Diego County Water Authority report says the agency has spent nearly $2.5 billion on local water projects. The authority's Dennis Cushman says careful water supply planning has primed San Diego's economic engine.
And we have a $220 billion regional economy today in our gross regional product. We support 1.4 million jobs in our region and a quality of life for 3.3 million people envied around the world.
Cushman says a drought in 1991 created a water crisis that pushed water managers to develop new sources of water. The local tourism authority's Joe Terzi says that reliable water supply allowed San Diego to become a region that welcomes visitors.
I mean, tourism really drives the San Diego economy. Some people don't understand that, but we get 35 million visitors a year in a city that has 3 million inhabitants. It's a major driver of the economy. $18 billion a year. $18 billion a year directly impacted because of tourism into San Diego.
Water is also crucial to other economic sectors here in San Diego, including manufacturing, agriculture, and even the region's nascent craft brewing industry. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
The San Diego Convention Center is hosting one of the largest gatherings of women in uniform. Today's symposium helps build leadership skills. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh is at the Convention Center. Steve?
Well, that's right, Ebony. If you look behind me, you can see people are just starting to file out here at the end of the day. More than 1,200 women are gathered here in San Diego for what's been called the Joint Women's Leadership Symposium. It's going on today, and it'll go on again tomorrow. And the topics include empowering women in a male-dominated profession and transitioning out of the service. To talk about it, we actually have the most senior member of the female member of the Marine Corps, Major General Loretta Reynolds. Major General, thanks for being on.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
So this year, the Marine Corps sent a very large contingency, one of the largest it's ever sent, over 200 women. Why?
Yeah, you're right. Really exciting. We've got probably the largest group that we've ever had at one of these symposiums. But, 2018 marks the 100th anniversary of women in the Marine Corps. And so it's a tremendous opportunity for us to bring more women together, and this is an exciting time for women in the military. Every job is open to them, and so how do you give them the tools? How do you introduce them to other folks that may be going through similar challenges? How do you remove obstacles to success? And so that's what this 2 days is all about. So it's really just exciting.
Yeah. And real briefly, what have you learned so far?
I always learn that there's more that we can do to mentor each other and to help each other out as a team, because there's always going to be somebody else out there that's going through something similar to what you're going through. So that's probably the biggest thing.
I wanted to get one of the organizers in here. This is Alexa Jenkins. She's a lieutenant commander, and she's president of Sea Service Leadership Association. You're the sponsors here. So it looks like a pretty good turnout.
This is a great turnout. It's our largest turnout that we've had actually in over 7 years, so we're really proud of this event.
So we were talking earlier, even though you see all these women coming out here, all these leaders in the military, that still many of these women will be the only woman in their unit. That's still an issue here. This is their big chance to be able to really mentor one another.
Yes, that's why we really focus on having women attend the symposium. Sometimes women are stationed in remote locations, so Guam, Japan, they may not have access to a lot of other senior military women. By coming to the symposium, they're able to interact and interface and network and really get empowered.
The big focus here is retention, keeping women in the service.
Yes, I think that's definitely one of our focus, but we really want people to be true to themselves. So I would say this isn't just about retaining, but we do want to make sure that we're listening to those concerns of women who want to stay. What can we do better for them?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This is the 30th one of these, is it not?
Yeah, 33rd. Yes, sir.
All right. And the largest?
And the largest. And we're hoping that next year in D.C. it's even bigger.
All right. So reporting live from the Convention Center here in San Diego, Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
Thanks, Steve. A Supreme Court ruling will change the way people shop online. The 5-4 decision clears the way for states to force online shoppers to pay sales tax. Some states argued they were missing out on a major source of tax revenue. Individual states will still need to pass their own tax collection laws. California already collects sales tax from large online retailers. The state has announced a rent control measure will be on the November ballot. Voters will be asked to repeal a law that bans rent control for apartments built after 1995. If the measure passes, local governments would then have the option to enact their own laws. While some California cities have a form of rent control, San Diego doesn't. Opponents of the measure say it could possibly discourage future construction. The California dream of retirement hasn't lived up to its promise. KPBS reporter Amita Sharma explains why many seniors are struggling to make it all work.
Hey, Jim, it's Roseanne. Hi, I want to let you know I so appreciate your sending the check.
That check Roseanne Goodwin is referring to is for $200. It's how much her friend Jim and his wife send Goodwin each month to help cover her living expenses. Other friends give her gift cards to grocery stores and treat her to meals.
Who I am now, I accept it with such gratitude. But who I was 5 or 10 years ago, I could have never asked or taken.
At 63, pride is a luxury. Goodwin receives $2,060 in Social Security each month, a sum that includes disability for the rare form of brain cancer she has. But her monthly expenses total $2,400. She supplements by selling belongings on eBay.
I've sold photo albums, I've sold whatever I could that's just around the house. So it might mean hand tools that I've had since I was in my 20s that my dad had given me for being out on my own.
Goodwin worked 35 years, mostly as a sales rep at companies like Xerox. She says she set aside 10% of her earnings for retirement, but layoffs and health problems depleted that nest egg, even though she stitched away to stay afloat through selling possessions, growing food in a garden, and accepting the generosity of friends. She says she's been thrown another wrench. Her rent is about to go up 50% on her one-bedroom apartment. She says the new owners of her apartment building aren't factoring in her ability to pay.
It is, to me, deplorable that we're considered disposable.
Goodwin's story is not uncommon in California, where 1 in 5 seniors lives in poverty, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. And Eric Bruvald of the San Diego North Economic Development Council says the prognosis is not good.
It's clear there's going to be a higher demand for subsidized senior housing. It's going to be clear that there's going to be greater levels of food insecurity for seniors because of low savings rates that they're facing. And there's going to be increased burdens on the taxpayers in terms of health care expenditures and long-term care expenditures because of this situation.
The advocacy group Justice and Aging says decades of wage stagnation, high housing and health care costs, and a decrease in company pensions have made it tough for people to save for their later years. The group says women are twice as likely to live in poverty as men. Nearly half of all Californians working today are on track to retire with incomes of $24,000 a year, according to the UC Berkeley Labor Center. And senior employment is at an all-time high in California. 26% of people in the state between the ages of 65 and 74 work, more than double what it was in the 1980s.
I work all the time. I work all the time.
Marigold Hernley is a realtor. She turns 70 this year.
I really would love to be retired, and I know, what I do. I have people over for dinner every day, probably, and work in my garden, raise my roses and tomatoes.
But if she didn't sell homes, she says her savings and Social Security are insufficient to stop her from descending into the ranks of the poor.
I feel betrayed. Sorry. I just do. I feel like... I don't think it's just necessarily a feminine thing, but I think that there should have been some education along the way, Everybody's afraid of growing old, so nobody ever talks about these things. And we were expected to get married, and that was going to solve all our problems. And in my case, it just didn't happen.
Amita Sharma, KPBS News.
That story is part of our statewide California Dream collaboration. You'll find more stories at kpbs.org/dream. On this first day of summer, we're seeing cooler temps by the beach and hotter weather in the desert. Justin Pavic has details in tonight's forecast.
Well, it's the combination of the major heat and the onshore flow that will have complete differences, again, over a relatively short distance. Coastal clouds in place over the course of the coming days. The interior heat, like I mentioned, could we see some changes, though, over the weekend? For the interior deserts, excessive heat warnings in effect here, and these go right into Friday evening in and around Borrego Springs. Otherwise, as we check out the satellite and the radar, you see no cloudiness, no wet weather, some low clouds get out toward the shoreline. We'll see these again tonight and again for tomorrow, perhaps breaking down just a bit before they start to become a little more common, even a little further inland as we venture into early week. Let's expand the view on out. Notice much of the Golden State is on the quiet side overall. Again, shoreline impacts, fog redevelops for tonight. Low cloudiness, restricting visibility and keeping temperatures in check for the most part. At the shoreline, will drop down to 62. And as we look at surrounding areas, notice Oceanside at 62. Borrego Springs only falling off into the 70s here for an hour or two. Chula Vista down to 63, Mount Laguna right around 60 degrees, and torrid heat continuing here over the interior as we talk about Friday's weather conditions. And look at this out toward Borrego Springs, 112. Some locations could go as high as 114. San Diego, 75. So a couple degrees above normal. Again, morning clouds, late day sunshine, and then as we venture toward the weekend, we're going to remain on the dry side. Not really anticipating any wet weather again this time of the year. Notice the trend here as we venture our way through the upcoming weekend into early next week. Fog and then some sunshine, and some of that fog could stretch a little further to some of the inland valley locations as we work our way again into the weekend. Inland areas looking at some sunshine, returning though as we venture into Monday and also Tuesday. Mountainous locations a little cooler here as we venture our way in toward Sunday, but still dry nonetheless. And notice over the deserts, a bit of a break from the heat as we head into Sunday. For KPBS News, I'm meteorologist Justin Pavic. Back over to you, Ebony.
Counties in California have joined the legal fight against the opioid crisis. Their lawsuits demand damages from drug companies. From WCPN Idea Stream, reporter Nick Costello looks at the price of addiction in Northeast Ohio.
Major Daniel Mason is the administrator of the Trumbull County Jail in Warren. Like several jails in Ohio, it's seen inmates overdose while incarcerated after drugs were smuggled inside.
It's actually, they pack it into a body cavity so that because when you come into the jail, you have to change out from your civilian clothes into jail clothes, and that's the only place that, something wouldn't be discovered.
Last year, the jail installed a piece of technology meant to make that harder to do, a $120,000 body scanner.
A little tight in here, but this is the body scanner here. Like I said, it's basically like being at the airport. When an inmate comes in, they step up on the platform, the corrections officer signs in, and then, they start the machine, and the platform will slide across to the right. It'll determine if somebody has something on them that we can't see during a pat down or during like a change out search.
Still, several inmates overdosed last year, even after the jail set up the scanner. But Mason says deputies have caught things too, thanks to the device. Trumbull County had the highest overdose death rate in Northeast Ohio for the years 2011 to 2016. Its public safety costs have been going up. In 2015, the county spent $20.2 million on safety. This year, Trumbull is planning for $26 million in expenses, according to the county auditor. Some of that is because of a pay increase for sheriff's deputies, but that's not the only reason. Mason says the jail is crowded, and that means higher costs for food and medical care.
You know, a lot of times the inmates are reaching out to the workers that are in the jail and explaining that the reason that they've committed these offenses are because of drug addiction problems.
Other agencies are feeling the strain, too.
We've already spent $1.5 million this year on addiction treatment services, and that's the most in any year ever.
April Caraway directs the Trumbull County Mental Health and Recovery Board. She says addiction recovery is taking up a bigger and bigger share of her budget. The board relies on local taxes as well as state and federal money. For Caraway, one federal program looms over everything: Medicaid expansion, which pays for treatment.
If they pull off that expanded Medicaid, I've got billings from the past couple years by month that shows how much more our board would have to come up with just to keep them in service. And it's not, I haven't looked lately, but last time I looked was $400,000 a month. I don't have that money. Where's that money going to come from?
A handful of agencies in Ohio have asked local taxpayers to chip in more, too. Like Mahoning County Children's Services in Youngstown. Voters passed a levy replacement last year.
So we're looking at $750,000 more to work with. So that is going to help us increase our intake department. It's going to help us be able to take more phone calls. One of the integrated things that we wanted to do is hire an actual addiction case manager, where they would actually be housed in the building, and we're working on that, where they could work directly with families who that we know are having addiction issues.
Next door in Trumbull County, Children's Services Director Tim Schaffner says his agency has not sought a levy increase yet.
But we're watching our budget and expenditures very closely. We're very conservative, but we expect to start deficit spending by 2019.
Schaffner says the opioid crisis isn't yet over.
I'm an optimist by nature, but I think we have a long way to go, miles to go before we sleep, in order for this crisis to abate. So, yeah, I would suspect that we'll be asking our voters to approve a little more money.
That was Nick Castell reporting. You can read more stories about the roadblocks and recovery of the opioid crisis at ideastream.org.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, Republican lawmakers' attempt today to come up with an immigration fix falls flat as children separated from their parents hang in the balance. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
Nearly half of homes in Boston are fatherless. This according to a national review of census data. One local group is trying to help men reconnect with their children. From WGBH News, reporter Tina Martin says the organization started with one man's personal journey.
Charles Daniels grew up in a single-parent family.
I grew up in a household without my father, primarily headed by my mother.
Daniels credits his mother and other family members for raising him in a loving home, but the pain of living without his father never went away.
When I was older, I found myself engaging in unhealthy coping mechanisms because I didn't like who I was. I felt unworthy. Come to find out, much of those unhealthy coping mechanisms was connected to me not having my father in my household.
He carried the hurt for years, even attempting suicide. After graduating from college, Daniels became a therapist with a special interest in children and families.
At the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that pain that I felt, another child didn't have to feel that. Let's get woo! What time is it?
Game time.
Mitch, give us some love, brother.
Daniels created Father's Uplift, an outpatient mental health clinic 8 years ago.
Our goal is to help a man overcome any barrier that can prevent him from being engaged in his kids' lives.
Barriers like homelessness, custody battles, and back child support payments. Father's Uplift staff members often serve as mediators with the Department of Revenue and the Department of Children and Families.
Oh my goodness.
With a staff of 7, Daniels serves more than 400 men and their families a year through advocacy, counseling services, parenting classes, and job referrals. Lamar Beck brings his son Lamar Jr. to the group sessions he's been attending for about a year. He credits Father's Uplift with helping him through tough times with his children.
Very supported, loved, loved.
And believes he's a better father as a result.
I like to use the word evolved. I've grown so much. I've become more patient.
Charles Daniels says it's the hands-on, honest approach that works, and it's not always easy.
We're making the difficult phone calls. We're having the difficult conversations. We are holding people accountable who are not giving fathers the best services they deserve.
Daniels is hopeful for all fathers, even the one he never knew.
Despite your mistakes, you still can be the father you always wanted to be. And I still believe that to be true about my father this day, right? Despite him being absent from my life, he still can be the father and the grandfather to his grandson today.
That was Tina Martin reporting from WGBH News in Boston. You can read more about Father's Uplift at WGBHnews.org. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.